So welcome everybody to our webinar on the challenge in procuRE. We will focus today on the technical part of the challenge, basically what are the solutions we are hoping to receive. There will be at least one more part where we will focus on the administrative and financial bits for the application itself. Today it is about basically what you would write in the technical template, something I will introduce a bit later. So the focus today, and this is basically the agenda, we will explain the core principles and terminology. Most of you are probably already aware of it, but just as a repetition. We will explain what is required in your proposal, basically what is my colleagues Roberto and Federico from URAC will present what the challenge brief is and the structure of the challenge brief, as well as the reference buildings. We will briefly explain what the expected outcome is. This has been already explained in a prior webinar in the tender launch. We will briefly give an overview and where you can find it to read it up. And we will explain how basically from the challenge brief you come to your application and how simple the structure is, if I may claim. Okay, a few bits about the core terminology. No, first, what's the focus? Just to make clear, today we will talk mostly about the challenge brief. If you have downloaded the zip file with all the documents, it is about TD2. If you want to open it on your second screen, feel invited to, as well as the annex to it. Strictly speaking, it's one document, but it doesn't fit in one PDF file, so it is two files. Section 2.1, which describes in TD1, which describes the expected output, and the template for your application, which is a Word file in your zip archive. Another meeting will focus on the administrative parts, a webinar on the administrative bits in January. Your colleagues from the administration, those who fill the forms, are obviously invited to join us then. So the key terms, briefly, the key terms as a reminder and to keep in mind when during the following presentations. What we are hoping to get is a new renovation approach, a way to renovate offices and schools to 100% renewable standard, which is different from the today's approach, which is often messy, inefficient, and doesn't yield the necessary results to accomplish the energy transition. So your renovation approach is a generic description of how you would renovate schools and offices to 100% or as close as you can get. This is not a 0-1 function, obviously, but as close as it is possible given the circumstances in a school. So it is a complete description of all the method, tools, hardware, software, ICT solutions, your management procedures, your design procedures, your co-design procedures, in one file, in your proposal file. And this describes your generic approach. And from this, during the project, not as part of the proposal, you will derive renovation packages, which are then applied to specific buildings. To go into a specific building, obviously, you need to do design efforts, look at specific conditions, etc., etc. We are doing it in a small bit, replicating this effort in a small bit via our reference buildings in the proposal, so that you can calculate and show us how efficient your solutions are, how effective your solutions are via KPIs. More to this later. Again, a reminder, procuRE is technology neutral. We do not have a particular choice of what you are to install, how you produce renewables or how you store the energy gathered. It is up to you to basically explain to us how a complete solution would look like. We describe the problem, you define the solution. So, and now I give the word to Roberto from URAC. He is key in designing. He was a key stakeholder and a key actor in the project in designing the challenge brief, in basically making sure that state of art is represented, what is possible, what is not, and he will walk you through the challenge brief.
Thank you, Georg. Hope you hear me. And sorry if you don't see me very well. I have light entering the window.
You're suddenly muted. We can see you, but you're suddenly muted.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted. Can you hear me now, Georg?
Yes.
Good. So good afternoon, everybody. And sorry if you cannot see me very well. I have light entering the windows from my left. But yeah, shortly going to the organization of the challenge brief, and then in this presentation, and then I will go through the document directly, just to be really concrete. So how we organize the challenge brief. Our view, our analysis when we started writing the project is that the retrofit of the buildings in the building sector has some few shortcomings, major shortcomings, and we were able to group these shortcomings into what we called a procuRE building blocks that you see on the slide. And in these building blocks, we identified challenges that need to somehow go some progress beyond the state of the art in order to have the retrofit performed in a proper and effective way. Here you see the 8 building blocks, the 8 challenges, organized into devices and units that are to be installed to retrofit the building, which is energy production and distribution components. Then we have challenges into storage components and then energy management components. But again, what we have identified is that retrofitting a building is not only a simple changing components with more effective ones, more efficient ones. It is also it has to do also about designing the system package in a proper way. So again, the challenge is the design itself in itself also. Apart from this, what we have identified is that monitoring and controlling the system itself is also one of the major challenges that are most of the time under-evaluated when retrofitting new buildings, when retrofitting old buildings, but also, by the way, new buildings. Finally, again, we are looking for solutions that are applicable. So we are not looking for retrofitting some few specific buildings within the project. We are willing to identify solutions that are applicable over time and over the building stock of the procurers. Therefore, again, what we need to look into, or what we would like suppliers to look into, is the financing of these solutions. So we don't want you to only look at the problem from the technical perspective. What we would like to also have is solutions that are evaluated and well thought from the economic sustainability perspective. Finally, again, not only energy and money, there are people living and operating in these buildings. Therefore, on the one hand, we want to look into the training of the professionals, meaning the facility managers mainly, that are going to take over the operation and the daily maintenance of the systems, and we want to also educate the occupants, people that are spending their time into the buildings, in order for them to be aware of what they have and how they should, what they have around themselves, and how they should behave in order to have an effective operation of the building itself. Okay. Overall, or maybe just a final word around this, what we would like to have is, again, a comprehensive, systematic approach to how the suppliers are going to tackle all these different challenges that I introduced so far, and that I will go into details later on. Okay, so again, we are not looking into designing and implementing single retrofitting packages. We are looking into developing together with suppliers and along the project elaboration, systemic, comprehensive approaches to how we want to retrofit schools and office buildings in a way that by the end of the project we have solutions that can be replicated over a large building stock. So once more, offices and schools, these are the specific buildings that by the end of the project the winning bidders are going to retrofit. On the left you see schools, on the right you see offices, even though in Istanbul we have a mixed use building which is offices plus a school, so to say. In this initial phase, however, what we would like you to do is to forget about these initial buildings, and this is because we would like to compare approaches that the suppliers are going to end in on a common background, on a common playground. Therefore, we don't want suppliers to make their proposal based on the specific buildings. We want suppliers, please, to provide their approaches based on two reference buildings. As you can see on the screen, they are simply models, so they are not real buildings. However, they are representative of the buildings that in the end will be retrofitted. And I will go through the why we selected this procedure in a minute, if you agree. So this is the organization of the challenge brief, and if I can take the the screen, Georg, I will stop presenting.
Yeah.
And share my screen. And this is the challenge brief you have downloaded, or you can find in your zip file with all the documentation. So as Georg said, we are talking about TD2 challenge brief. And going into the document directly, hopefully you see it big enough. After an initial background explanation of what or why we want to go through retrofit of public buildings, probably none of you need any further instruction why, or any further insight into why, we introduce the common challenge, which is basically to receive, which is the procurers want to receive renovation approaches to how generate renovation packages delivering 100% renewable energy supply to existing schools and offices. We said no residential buildings, but again, it is schools and offices. again, renovation approach and renewable energy supply to buildings that have already an adequate envelope quality. So the tender here, the project here, is focusing on heating, cooling, ventilation, lighting appliances, all the energy uses of the buildings, by the way. It does not look into the renovation of the envelope of the building itself. And this is the first reason why we look into reference buildings at this stage of the project. Some of the buildings that are shown on my second slide have not yet a very good envelope quality, and the envelope will be retrofitted together alongside the project elaboration. So the suppliers will find a good or another a building, or will find 6 buildings with adequate envelope quality by the end of the project, but so far they are not all retrofitted in terms of the envelope. Therefore, again, if suppliers would were required to propose approaches for their specific buildings, the result might have resulted, say, biased somehow or wrong, because specific for a specific building. Therefore, again, we wanted to concentrate on buildings, on building models that are representative of what is going to be the envelope by the end of the project for each of the buildings. And again, here we specify what is the renovation approach in our mind. Again, renovation approach is what we want to get by March next year, defined by March next year in this initial phase. And again, for us, the renovation approach is a well-documented toolkit of how the suppliers would tackle all the challenges that I mentioned in my initial slide. So how the design is tackled, how renewable energy sources, production, storage, and utilization is undertaken, how monitoring and control is performed, and so on and so forth. How financing is provided, all to go through the investment that is going to follow the follow up with the retrofit. So this again is renovation approach. We don't pretend from now until March that you design the retrofit. That is going to happen through the months and years in different phases, as we already have said. But again, what we would like to let us have in this initial phase is an overall systemic approach how to tackle the different challenges. And here is how we have organized the explanation around these challenges. So in section 1, the technical criterion, you have a number of subsections as the building blocks are, starting from the approach challenge. So the approach needs to take into consideration the cover, or needs to provide a solution or solutions to the coverage of the energy demand of the buildings, heating, cooling, ventilation, and then all electric appliances and lighting by on-site renewable energy sources production. And again, here on-site means the building envelope, under the building, over the building, and the near vicinity of the building. Once more, we didn't want to use the specific buildings that that are going to be retrofitted in this initial phase, because the near vicinity of the specific buildings is really different. In one case, we have no vicinity because the building is set into the city center of a municipality. In another case, the building is an old airport terminal. So you can imagine that the vicinity of this the vicinity of this building is the entire airport surface. So that is huge. The point is that we don't want you to use, we don't want you to propose a solution in which you cover the airport surface with PV panels, and then you cover energy needs by this PV electricity production, because that is not replicable on a wide scale. Again, we want you to have approaches that are replicable over wide scales. Okay. Therefore, again, we propose to, for now, to look into, say, quite common reference buildings with narrow vicinities, so to say, available. And indeed, again, production of renewable on site. We want suppliers to tackle the problem of the self-consumption. So again, it is easy to install a lot of PV and then rely on the electricity grid to store energy and to redistribute energy, and then to get renewable energy back on site. But again, in the future, that is not going to be really easy done on a systemic level, on a system level, energy system level, I mean, in this case. Therefore, we want suppliers also to look into how to manage renewable energy on site. And finally, again, we don't want to only work, only look into the energy problem, but we want to also get feedback in terms of comfort and costs. This on the approach overall, and the approach should be divided into how suppliers want to tackle design, first of all. Design is disregarded most of the time, and again, the interaction of the planners with the procuREs is disregarded most of the time, which is the expectations of the procuREs are not met in the end. So what we would like the suppliers to do is to brainstorm and propose well-structured design workflows that take into consideration also the interaction with the procuREs. We would like to have also modeling and technology selection methodologies well highlighted within the design procedure. And in the end, the procuREs welcome the utilization of BIM platforms for along the design phase, also as a way to interact and co-design the solution, the system package. The second building block is, or the third building block in this case, is the monitoring and management. Also, this aspect is most of the time disregarded, meaning that the retrofit is looking into changing components, but then the components are not managed in a proper way and not monitored in a proper way, and through the years, the performance of the systems is reducing with missing maintenance and and reduced performance of the single units. So again, in the approach, we would expect to receive also clear indications in terms of how the system packages are going to be monitored and managed, And we would like to also receive clear key performance indicators that are going to be used to set minimum performance values that are expected during the design phase and tracked during the monitoring, say after the commissioning of the systems, during through monitoring and control of the systems themselves. We also expect a monitoring system guideline, which is going to be used then by the facility managers. One topic that we tackle in the challenge brief is smart controls and predictive maintenance strategies. Again, that are not a must, but again, we really welcome proposals that are taking into consideration advanced controls and advanced maintenance strategies into the overall management and monitoring strategy of the systems. When it comes to the single components, energy production and distribution components, we request suppliers to look into technologies that obviously produce or say require low final energy to be run, that allow obviously to harvest a lot of renewable energy on site. And we request also suppliers to look into the life cycle impact of the technologies. So that is going to be really relevant in the future, and procuREs look into this aspect also. In this initial phase, we would like to see a set of pre-selected technologies that should cover somehow different kind of buildings and different climatic zones, but also different regulatory regimes. So we want to also be sure that the technology that you propose are actually can be actually implemented in different member states in Europe, Turkey and Israel also, that are in focus here. Energy storage, same point. We want to have solutions that maximize self-consumption or optimize self-consumption. Again, we want to have units that maximize energy storage capacity with low investment cost and with a look into life cycle impact, as I said before. And again, energy management components, we would like to have indications in terms of a minimal and coherent set of sensors, meters, and acquisition systems or acquisition system singular that can be somehow implemented in a public building, in an office or a school, a set of components that is modular eventually, and that can be scaled up in a flexible way over larger or smaller buildings. Apart from the hardware perspective, what we would like to also understand if there is a perspective on how to store energy data in a proper way, and share this data in a proper way with the facility managers, users of the buildings and owners of the buildings. So again, also saving data and sharing data is relevant in our perspective. And again, procuREs welcome the use of the BIM platform for this purpose, so to share this kind of information, so that the BIM platform can last longer than the initial design phase, and can be used also after commissioning as a working tool. This from the technical perspective, and from the approaches that we, from the overall approach that we expect to get by suppliers. What we would like to have with respect to the reference buildings, once more, so the initial models in this phase, is also some key performance indicators be calculated. And what we expect to get is basically, on the one hand, for the two reference buildings and for two climates that my colleague Federico will tell you better about in some minutes. What we would like to have is basically, through the approaches that you foresee to implement, what kind of, or what final energy consumption it is expected by the end of the year. So megawatt hours a year and megawatt hour per cubic meter a year, in terms of the energy which is used to cover thermal and electric needs of the buildings. For this, we can accept dynamic simulations or semi-dynamic methods that are accepted in the single national normatives. What we would like to have, however, is not only the yearly consumption, energy consumption. What we would like to have is also the hourly consumption. So that this is why we basically ask to at least use these semi-dynamic methods for the energy users calculation. Indeed, we would like to get also indication on on-site renewable energy production, and this is for any kind of energy vector you are going to foresee. So again, it can be electricity, it can be thermal energy, renewable thermal energy that you would like to provide to the building. For each of the renewable energy source and the energy vector, we would like to understand what are megawatt hours produced every hour and megawatt hours produced over the year, as in the previous case. Starting from those, what we would like to understand, and that is the most interesting and important indicator for us, is the renewable energy share, which is, again, for each hour of the day and for each energy vector, I and J, what we would like to get is how much renewable energy is directly produced and used on site, how much energy is stored and then used on site, as compared to the final energy of the building itself. So again, how much of the final energy of the building for each of the vectors, thermal and electric, is covered by the renewable energy that is produced directly in that hour of the day, or previously stored and then used during that hour of the day. Okay. Apart from this, we would like to also get into how energy is produced, renewable energy is produced on site and then used on site. Therefore, again, we define this renewable energy production to consumption ratio. It is kind of a self-consumption, but not exactly, meaning that this number can be higher than 1. What we want to understand is to what extent the renewable energy production is going to impact on the energy grid around the buildings. Therefore, we want to understand how much for each hour and for each energy vector, how much renewable energy is produced compared to the final energy which is used on site, final energy which is consumed during the same time frame. And finally, what we want to understand is, from another perspective, very similar to the previous one, how much of the energy which is produced on site is directly used or stored. So again, here, based using renewable energy production as a basis, we want to understand how much of that is directly used or stored on site. Therefore, again, how few the energy system of the building is going to impact on the grids around the building. Apart from the energy perspective, as I said before, we want to look into comfort for the users, so indoor air quality and indoor air temperature, and indoor air quality to be calculated based on CO2 ppms inside the building rooms. In the future, in the future phases of the project, we are going to also ask to deepen in terms of lighting conditions, which is a little tricky to be calculated. Therefore, we decided for this initial phase to leave it out. And we want to also look into environmental impact of the solution that the suppliers are going to propose. Therefore, again, for each of the two buildings, we would like to also get indications in terms of CO2 emissions of the systems on a yearly basis. In the future, in the future phases, we will ask also an insight into global warming potential and waste management of the over the construction site, but again, nothing really relevant for this initial phase. This from the technical perspective, again, T3 1.3 and T3 is again looking into training and education. Training of the operators, again, which is facility managers and occupants. So we want to train facility managers. We want facility managers to be trained by the suppliers by the end of the project, in order for them to be aware of what they need to do, how they need to manage the systems. On the other hand, as I said already, we want occupants to be aware of what they to be aware of the buildings they live in, and therefore how they need to behave in order to maximize the effectiveness, the efficiency of the systems that have been installed. Again, we don't ask suppliers, obviously, to train occupants and operators now, but we would like to have a strategy towards training and education already tackled as part of the overall approach in this initial phase. Going quickly, because I think I'm quite too long. We cannot accept technical solutions that are market available already. That is not pre-commercial procurement. If it is commercial, that is not acceptable. So we are looking for solutions that go beyond commercial, and again, that tackle this challenge of getting 100% of the demand of the buildings covered with local renewables. Finally, last challenge is towards the economic sustainability of the solutions, of the investment. We also look for innovative approaches to financing the energy renovation. we are not at all, we have no preference in one or the other direction, as I highlighted here. But again, we expect by the end of the project or by the end of this initial phase that the suppliers have already identified a way how to tackle the investment. Again, we do not pretend the suppliers retrofit the building and also bring in the money to retrofit the building. That is not needed. But again, once more, we need to understand how the suppliers will help the procure's in terms of facing the financial burden of the retrofit investment. And finally, what we need to get is also an indication in terms of how the supplier expect to go through the commercialization phase of the solutions, which is by the end of the project, how they think they would like to replicate their solutions beyond the 6 buildings that we are going to tackle along the project. That was me from the more technical perspective. I would like to hand over again back to Georg, just to finalize some indication here on the project management. And then Federico is going to take over for the reference business.
Thank you.
Do you want me to share again, Georg? Or
yeah, maybe you share it. It's quicker than I. Yeah, thank you, Roberto. So that's the overview over the first 2 sections. In project management, there are 2 elements to it. First is the interface to procure's, which is basically the co-design procedure. Roberto already mentioned it during the presentation of the system package design, that you will have your internal workflows of designing, but we also expect a description of a procedure on how you would interact with the procurers. I mean, looking forward, your approach is successful and the procurers come back to you and say, okay, you've done 1 building for me, now I want 5, I want 10, whatever. Then there must be a procedure with which you are able to make decisions quickly, inform them about their any decisions necessary, and so on. Your approach by then will be known. So there's a structure, there's a framework in a way, but obviously specific buildings require specific decisions. So you would provide us with a toolkit which can be reused, which is scalable meaning more buildings, and it is procedure which kind of will feel familiar, and you will have also opportunity to trial. So see this, the project, when you're in the project, you don't have to have it nailed on, spot on from the beginning and through the project. No, you will be able to tweak it. You will be able to tweak the renovation approach, including this co-design procedure throughout the project. And therefore, maybe try new things on how you go about with your customers. Yeah, definitely us, the procurers in the project, but maybe it is also an added benefit beyond the project, independent of the approach. So that's that. It requires certain elements, obviously, making decisions together and talking to one another. But yeah, have a look at it in reading. No point listing the bullets. And this from the decision process before the building has been changed. Obviously, afterwards, there is a continuous commissioning process, which requires once a year or whatever you suggest to meet up and look at the performance. Depending on your contract model, it also has maybe financial impact, basically saying to judge whether the procurer has acted outside of the bounds agreed before or vice versa, and what kind of maintenance measures are necessary, which go beyond what is already agreed. All these things, most of all, obviously, observing the performance of the building as such. And the final two challenges are really just award criteria in a way. They are standard stuff. Basically, provide us with a description of your plan to do the project. It is a R&D project, a very large R&D project who is successful and goes to phase 2, final phase 3, has almost 3 million received. So obviously it requires a good approach of how to conduct the project. It does not, again, have to be super final for the final phase on how you're going to implement the buildings. This will become more obvious in a minute when I present the technical template. But in general, good standard diligence of quality, completeness, and feasibility of your plans is basically described here. So anything you have written in any tender research project before in good standard, and we guide you on what you request there. That would mean Federico takes over, who's going to present.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Georg.
Georg, do you want to share the presentation or I share the presentation?
Sorry, I remembered that we agreed on that. Yes, I could. Yep, there we go. And let's jump to the right slide.
Slide 14 should be.
Yep.
Okay, take control. Okay, thank you all, and also good afternoon from my side. I will go quite fastly into the reference building characteristic. As already mentioned by Roberto and Georg, we want that the supplier's proposal will be comparable, and to be comparable, they need to be on the same baseline. So we basically decide to have these reference buildings, one reference office and one reference school, and the explanation and all the material made available to describe the boundary condition and the description of the reference buildings are available in an annex to the challenge brief, the Annex E. What contains the Annex E of the challenge brief? Basically, for each reference building, we prepared a Word document containing the description of the reference building considered, and containing also a description of how the material made available is structured. In addition to that, there is also an Excel file containing the building model inputs that must be used, and one EDF files that can be used as a guide. An EDF file is a file that can be used in Energy Plus or different simulation program. Generally, you have to develop. We prepared one example EDF file that we made available. It's not final, so it cannot be directly used because some assumption must be changed according to what is reported in the description document. But yeah, you can use it as a guide for developing your EDF final file. Not only the reference building must be the same, but to have comparable results, also the climatic condition that we have outside the building must be the same. And for this reason, considering that we are focused on the European zone, we decided to use two different climates. One climate with the reference city of Nuremberg that represent basically the European continental climate, and the Mediterranean climate, and we use the reference city of Istanbul. The material made available regarding the climatic information is basically composed by one Word document in which a description of the material available, about the location considered, and some analysis about the main quantities basically the outside temperature trends and irradiation on the horizontal surface are reported. And in addition to this document that describe the locations considered, the climatic data are available basically in three formats. We have the APV and TM2 formats that are formats commonly used in dynamic simulation program like Energy Plus or Transys. And if you don't want to use this kind of software and you want to have a simplified, let's say, version of the climatic data, we prepared also a CSV file including the main climatic data for the two locations, basically the external temperature, the relative humidity, and the horizontal radiation. Now I want to share directly my screen so we can have a look on what you will find in the Annex C folder. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, Federico.
Okay, so this is the Annex C folder, and as said, you will find for each reference building one Word document, one Excel document, and one EDF file. And the Word document is structured in this way. I open here now, and yeah, basically after an introduction that explains which is the scope of this document, and we also reported a couple of sections in which the various resources used are mentioned. We go to the building description, and in particular we presented the building model to be used, where the information are mainly taken, and a series of information regarding basically the geometrical part in the first table. Then we have a section dedicated to the description of the envelope characteristics, so basically the thermal transmittance that you must consider, and which are the standards that we used to fix these values. Obviously, considering two different climates, we have a table for the considered reference building in one climate, the European climate in one case, and the Mediterranean climate in the other case. Then we have a section about some indication about the emission units considered to be considered for the reference building. And then we have the schedules section, in which basically we define the internal gains that you have to consider, because internal heat gains contributes to the energy balance, to the thermal energy balance of the building, and must be taken into account. Basically, we consider three sources of internal heat gains in the building that are related to the presence of occupants, to the use of appliance, and the use of lights. How you can define the heating contribution of each of these sources? Basically, we report the schedule for each hour of the day and for different day along the year. Here, basically, this is the fraction of the nominal load that must be considered. And in this way, you can evaluate for each hour of the year, which is the heat contribution associated to the presence of person inside the building. The same procedure is that is in this case presented for the occupancy contribution is also replicated for the appliances and for the lighting system. And at the conclusion of this section, we have also reported indication about the heating and cooling set points that must be considered. as you can see in this figure 6 of the report, basically you find for different days of the week, for each hour of the day, which is the temperature set point that must be ensured inside the building. In this case, we are talking about heating season, so the temperature that must be ensured during the winter period inside the building, and then we have a similar figure regarding the summer period, so the temperature that must be ensured during the summer. Then we have the last three sections of the document that present the indication that must be considered regarding infiltration and ventilation, therefore the relation and the exchange of air between inside of the building and the external ambient. And then we also have a short section about the service hot water demand to be considered. Non-residential buildings does not present really important amount, really important consumption of domestic hot water, but in any case, we retain useful to consider the amount presented and given in the inputs. And this is all for the Word document that presents the description of the reference building. You will find, in this case, we are talking about the office reference building, but you will find basically the same document for the school. I will move fast to the Excel, basically this second file containing the model input, the building model input that you will find in the available material. The Excel is basically composed by different sheets. First of all, you have a legend in which you have the explanation of the various abbreviation and colors used in the file. Then we have a sheet called building summary that basically reports the main geometric characteristics of the building considered. Then we have a zone summary sheet in which for each zone of the building indication in terms of people present, nominal number of people present in the various zone, or indication about the nominal power for lighting system and for appliances, as well as indication about ventilation and infiltration are reported. Then you have the picture that basically you already see in the Word document that we reported also in the presentation, and then a file, a sheet called schedules, in which basically for all the hours of the day for different periods of the year, you have the indication about the schedule for occupancy, for lightings, for the appliances, and for basically all the information you need to evaluate the building thermal balance during the entire year. Then you have simply some graph reporting different schedules for the lighting, for the equipment, for the occupancy, and the heating and cooling set point that we already saw in the Word document. Basically, all the information taken from the Word document, or almost all, in some cases it is specified if different, are taken from this Excel file. And the last file available is an EDF file. Yeah, we can open, but it's a quite standard EDF file that you can use as a base to develop your EDF file and to run, for example, simulation for the evaluation. Lastly, regarding the climatic data made available, as already said, we have a Word document that basically contains an explanation of the data analyzed, of the locations considered, and where the data are taken from. They are taken from the software meteornorm, and here we have a reference to the considered version. And then for the two reference city of Nuremberg and Istanbul, in this document you will find basically some analysis like the annual temperature and the radiation trends and the yearly duration curve of external ambient temperature and of irradiation on the horizontal surface. Moreover, for each of the two reference locations, in the respective folder for Istanbul and Nuremberg, as already said, you will find the climatic data in the two simulation format in APV and TM2 formats, and the some of the climatic data, the most important, also in CSV format. Only to give you an idea, I'm opening the CSV format. Basically, for each hour of the year, you have the indication about the information about external temperature, relative humidity, and total horizontal radiation. And this is all regarding the material made available in the Annex E, and specifically for the definition of a reference building and all the boundary conditions to be assumed, and reference climate and what has to be considered. And with this, I go back the word to Georg, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Federico. This was an introduction into what the buildings are. I mean, this is work you do regularly in a way. It's just specific in this particular case. The majority of formats should be known to you. I give the word to Mehmet, a colleague from me at Empirica, who worked at the Energy Agency in Sweden, and he's going to briefly summarize the output in the project, not in the proposal, but basically what would be done during the project across the phases.
Yeah, thank you, Georg. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the meeting, the event today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the expected outcome, which is already described in detail in TD1, the request for tender document, in the section 2.1. So you may have already been familiar with this, but I'm just going to go through it a little bit. So we have currently the call for tender, where you send in your proposals for renovation approach. So this renovation approach is it's going to live throughout the project. So it is not only a one-stage thing, but it will be used throughout the whole lifetime of the project. Should you receive the chance to actually deliver in the other phases. So this is not work that will be thrown away, but will be used and be very valuable to any future work. So we have, as you see, 3 phases: solution design, prototype development, and then further development of the prototype, and then in the phase 3, the implementing of these prototypes, which means installation and operation. And this occurs in a near dialogue with the procuREs and other relevant stakeholders in this process that they may have. And we also have this approach of continuous commissioning that the supplying parties, they don't only install and leave, but they also monitor and improve the performance, the operational performance of the systems to be delivered. But for now, you are only required to deliver the approach that you'll work with, and that will be applicable to any school or office across Europe, and that's why we actually have two relatively different climates for this assignment, but in the other phases of the project, you will work with specific buildings, which our procuREs have. So at the moment, you're developing the renovation approach, which is the call for tender proposal section of the project or of the general procuRE project. And there we have two reference buildings, as said, in two different climates. It's open as long as you're not affected by the exclusion criteria. It's an open tender for single organizations, but of course consortia that bring together different organizations, which can be expected, especially considering the scope of the project. The time frame is 3 months, and then we will have an evaluation period. We're expecting to select 6 actors to continue in the phase 1. And then in phase 2, this is expected to be reduced to 4 after call-off. And in phase 3, where we will really see these solutions that are proposed physically, that they will be installed, there will be expected 2 actors or 2 suppliers that achieve that part of the that phase of the project. And you can also see the financing that is foreseen for these steps per contractor, maximum amounts, and also a little bit of what is expected, which is in phase 1 a schematic design, in phase 2 a bit more developed, more detailed design, and then in phase 3, as I said, the installation and operation of the proposed solutions. Yes. And then in the next step, we have the technical application template. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Mehmet. I'm going to present the technical application template as a reminder from the tender launch event, basically on the structure. We have aligned as much as we can in the proposal package 3 things: the award criteria, the challenge brief, headlines, and in accordance the headings and the structure of the technical application template. So you already saw, Roberto presented to you, technical criterion, and then under it there were several sections, T11, T12, and so on. This is the same as it is in the award criteria table. Yeah, each section is one award criteria, and this pulls through to the template. So when you write the template, you will know that you respond to this part of the challenge brief, and the impact of it will have the weight in assigned in the award criteria. It is all aligned, and this gives you as much structure as possible to verify that what we are looking forward is what you are also writing. I will briefly show you the file. So the structure basically here in the table of contents is identical to what you can see, or near identical to what you can see in the challenge brief. And on the 3rd level, though, you might find a few more bits which weren't in the challenge brief. This is basically splitting what might not have been there, in particular at the bottom here, not at the top. Up to here, it is almost the same. Everything you see in this wonderful color of pink is description, notes. Yeah, you can delete them as soon as you want to delete them. They don't have to remain. Overall, there are some instructions basically on or reminders on how to act. Some are maybe not necessary, some are maybe instructive, I don't know. Most important is obviously the limit, 90 pages. Everything above that we will have to delete if you want, or not read, as it is common standard by now in Horizon projects and so on. The few bits at the bottom are mandatory. This will become also obvious in the admin webinar the next week. And this is not only on the top level, also within each section, we give a little bit of insight of what kind of content we expect. I mean, what you're responding to is described in the challenge brief, and the pink here describes a little bit of what kind of content we are hoping for. This goes so far as to also provide you with tables which require filling. A question raised earlier, how many calculations do you have to perform? Yes, it is 4 for the school twice, for the office twice. There's not much more to, okay, yeah, there's one tiny bit more to add. Sometimes you see subheadings. These are recommendations. You can follow them. You can leave it out. It's up to you. You are free to structure it as long as you keep the first 2 levels as they are. You are free to reorder any element here in this part. And yeah, list of work packages and so on. These are templates. You can use them. Certain things are required. Here, basically the deliverables which are taken from the work package from the TD1. Some of them, the list is long, but please remember, some of them are really repetitions. Yeah, they are one-to-one what has been written before, like the project abstract. It's most likely what you have already written in phase 2 and phase 1. And the renovation approach, yes, you deliver it 3 times. You deliver it 4 times, in fact, with the proposal, the deliverable 1 in phase 1 and 2 and 3. But there are successive improvements, iterations of the initial version. And that's basically it. I correct myself a second time. We have already included, for your information, bits which will be required later on. You can immediately delete this. This is just so you know that, for instance, prototype planning, we do not require to do you, if you have prototypes, do not require for you to do in the initial proposal, but during the call-off in phase 1. So you will basically take your offer to get from phase 1 to phase 2 and update it and complete it with some additional detail. And that's that. There was one question earlier regarding the financing, the cost side of things. From Olivier, he basically asks whether how and what needs to be financed during the project. So what we have is a complete tender, and the tender requires that the buildings are renovated to as close as can be to 100% renewables at the end of the project. So the sum, this is the ceiling of the cost which will be invested. Yeah. However, energy is complicated because energy is consumed all the time. So let's say you achieve not 100% but 98%. So the final 2% will obviously remain as cost by the procurers in the future for ever and ever. And what is also not included are any kind of operational costs which might exist from your design. Yeah, let's say that your regular approach to this would be that the procurers subscribe to 10 years of annual fees of so and so many thousand euros. In phase 3, you will provide the procurers with an offer, which will be no surprise because of all the documentation before. And then they would basically sign that you supply them for another few years for this operational side of things. But for equipment, yes, the payment is complete and no further payments come for the installation itself. And yeah, as to the sums, Olivier also rightly pointed out, that yeah, there are three sums, roughly 200,000, roughly 600,000, roughly 2.1 million across the phases. In the final phase, you have to equip 3 buildings. Some of the things you are going to implement software, is training material and so on. This shouldn't be necessary to replicate, and hopefully you have designed it in the initial phases. So the marginal cost of this is minimal, but the equipment costs are obviously there, and this depends on your solution. Are there any other questions? I think you can freely speak. If not, write briefly in the chat or just one sign and we unmute you. But you must unmute yourself. You have now the mics open, but you still need to unmute yourself if you want to speak.
Yeah, George, Oliver here. Do you listen to me? Yeah.
Yep.
So thank you for the response. And so like I was asking at the end, is there any, because I understand, so we designed the prototype, so it's right that there are some elements, especially software and some way of doing, and there are some elements that can be replicated with no much additional cost from one side to the other. But on more, let's say, prototypes element, like the physical element, like the RES production, the storage, energy management and monitoring, as those elements could have a real cost, is there any residual value expected at the end? And with that question, I have the question, who is the owner at the end of those installations? Are we the owner still? So is it expected that we bring back our prototypes home, let's say, or should we let them on site? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, I answer the second part, and maybe Roberto, you help me with the first part with the residual value. So first of all, it is an R&D project. So if you say certain things will definitely we will definitely take back, then you could write this. Yeah, write it there is a list basic for it, a section for it in the proposal as well, where you would write, I don't know, we test a prototype of our new PV panels in this project. This goes back. Yeah, then you would describe that. But normally, the expectation or the assumption is that the equipment remains with the procurers because the building has been changed. Yeah, and you don't want to be put in a position that you have to reverse the building to the previous state.
Yeah,
it is a mutual in the mutual benefit. But if there are bits you want to exclude, this is possible.
And so second question, is there any residual value? Because it's also part of the deal. We understand that those solutions normally are sometimes difficult to finance because in that case, because they are new, but even when they are not new, they have some times of amortization. Is there any residual value if there is only, like in this case, like 16 months of use?
Yeah, maybe respond to this. I mean, Roberto, you correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, the project here is an R&D service contract. Yeah, so any equipment basically comes on top, or is part of the service provided, and therefore, I mean, inherently, obviously, they still have it, but it doesn't matter for the finance part of it. This might be different if you if the solution is replicated. Yeah, if the you go to the procurer comes to you and says, please do the next 3 buildings with me, then this model might change. But this here is a tender for services.
Okay.
And just to be very clear, I mean, because you use the average, not that there's a misunderstanding, you have a total of 2.1 million. How you spend it across the sites is up to you. Yeah. If you can equip one site with 200,000, the other a bit more, then this is your thing. You give us a price, a total price for the phase, and the rest is up to you. it will become, through the renovation packages, it will become transparent in a way of how much the solution costs in any given site, but it doesn't affect your financial standing. You will receive the entire sum no matter what. Any technical questions? Yeah, I mean, if not, then we will stay here because we're so few. If you want to chat between you to find partners because you're looking for someone, then you could raise the question here, or you write the people. It's up to you. But for the proposal, basically, yeah, think of a new renovation approach. You describe how it would be, and then as an exercise, as part of the approach, you go to the reference buildings whether this proves out. Yeah, and the result of which, the optimized result of which, is your proposal, your offer. And since 6 suppliers will be taken onto the first phase, the likelihood of winning is at least better as with the other tenders, yeah, as with the regular tender. We obviously hope for still the optimum quality, but yeah, I would say this challenge, as we described it, is really the issue at the heart of the renovation wave. Yes, you can do prefab stuff and whatever not, and this is another approach, but it will not cover everything. Something else has to come, and we believe that this is the way to go forward. But Dieter, you have a question.
Yeah, this concerns the group of people or companies which applies. Are there any restrictions in the number or the location of the groups? They have to come from Europe, I guess. But, this just open to whoever applies. So how do you organize this?
On the setup and structure of the consortium, there's absolutely no limitations. Yeah, can be one, can be many, can be subcontractors or without. Doesn't matter. As to where do they come from, 50% of the work has to happen within the European Union or associated countries. So one of the few cases I can think of is that if you have a American company with you, then the 50% of the resources shouldn't be spent there, but with partners in Europe. That's almost the only wall you can run against.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, otherwise we leave it at that. We're looking forward to your proposals. In January there will be the other webinar. If you have any questions in the meantime, ideally use the S-Procurement platform. We received a few administrative questions now. We respond to them soon. Everything will be public there, but we will also add it to our FAQ on the website.